just to clarify what our process will be here. So we both had an opportunity to take a look at your document, and so we have that sort of background. We'll start with your presentation. As I told you before, please try to keep it to 20 or 25 minutes. Just give us an overview of sort of what you've written and then what the website that you're creating. And once you get done with your presentation, we'll have an opportunity to ask any questions or any comments or anything like that we might have. Once we get done with that part, we will send you out in the hallway so we can talk about you behind your back.
Okay.
And we'll make a final decision about the outcome of the defense. There's three possible outcomes. One is that you fail the defense, which probably shouldn't happen because we probably shouldn't have got to this point if that was going to happen. One is that you pass the defense with flying colors. There's nothing else you need to do. That probably won't happen because there's always something else you can do. And the third outcome is that we pass you on the defense. We ask you to make a couple final adjustments to the document before we move forward. So we'll let you know what that is. And then you and I will chat a little bit about next steps forward at that point. Okay? Any questions, any concerns before we get started? No?
Okay.
All right.
We're ready?
I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, so since we are all familiar with the paper stuff, so I thought what I would do with the actual slideshow presentation is just kind of go over some of the most important parts. But I wanted to comment on why I chose to do this. I could have picked pretty much any topic for my capstone, but the reason why I entered graduate school in the first place is I've been working on curriculum stuff for the last 30 years, and I really wanted to find a way to apply it in the academic setting and become better. That's why I decided to do graduate school. I wanted to become better, and I really do feel like I've gotten a lot better. I didn't realize how bad I was. So, I was kind of frustrated in the beginning because I had to take all these classes that didn't seem to be relevant to me at the time. But in hindsight, oh, they were totally relevant. I had to go through all that stuff to get to this point of this capstone where I could work on something that I was really interested in. So this comes out of a passion of mine, and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper and become better at this topic. So that said, I think I'm on the wrong slide. Okay, online distance learning. Constructivist learning theory, percussion education pedagogy, and studypercussion.org. Abstract. The purpose of this capstone project is to describe an online distance learning program that serves all areas of percussion pedagogy using constructive learning theory that is accessible to performers, educators, students, and aficionados. There are several online distance learning programs and resources available for percussion instruction. However, most focus on one area of percussion or specific ideas within an area rather than delivering an all-inclusive, broad-based percussion curriculum. So what I mean by that is, if you go online, you go to any universities, universities is a little bit different, but sometimes they tend to do this too. But if you just do like a general search, all the capitalistic stuff, the commercialistic stuff, most of it focuses on like just snare drum or just drum set, or maybe it's a marimba person, very specific things, or African hand drumming and things like that. And so if you want to use these sort of things as a teacher, you have to like pull from all these different things, and you have to find all these different things and make it presentable to your students so that they have access to this stuff and know what to look at, as opposed to what you don't want them to look at, because there's plenty of bad stuff out there too. So there's a lot of that out there, but there's not really, the closest thing I've found to a website where there seems to be a lot of inclusion of multiple instruments would be something like Bigfoot.com or some of these larger companies. But even still, they're more like marketing products and not so much doing the thorough education thing. So what I wanted to do was create a website where anybody could like log into that thing, and it's almost like pulling up anything from these books that I presented here, but it's online. Now some of these books are like $400 or $500. Not everybody has access to that. But what we can do is take some of the information from these books and put it into a resource where it's accessible to everybody. And my goal is to make this website free to anybody who uses it. If you want to ask me about how the money thing is going to work, we can talk about that later. But for our purposes today, I'm trying to make it free for everybody. Online distance learning. Online distance learning is a rapidly growing method for teachers and students to connect. We saw this even before the pandemic, but the pandemic forced many of us to adopt methods and strategies and technologies used to facilitate online distance learning. I want to make a comment about that. I started working on this in 2016, and I was earmarked to graduate then, but between stuff with my family and my kids and life just getting down on me, I was able to complete my classes, but I wasn't able to get this done in that time. But in a way, I think it was kind of a blessing, because then a couple years later, we had the pandemic hit us, and I had to find a way to get through the pandemic because we were closed for a year and a half. I had to find a way to do this. What did I do? I fell back on the research that I did in my capstone. Okay, how can I do stuff online? How can I be more creative? Come up with different methods and strategies for things. So in a way, I count that to be a blessing. And I kind of laugh and jest about it because that was hard. It was super hard. So I started working on this stuff long before we had to deal with that. And before the pandemic, yes, of course, we were doing online distance learning, but not obviously as prevalent as it was during the pandemic. And now all of us had to grow up with it. So it's kind of ubiquitous in that way now. Everybody who's an educator of some sort has to deal with us on some level because we had to force ourselves to do it in the pandemic. So some historical context. Pre-internet days required education at a distance to be performed through correspondence courses, exchanging mail at regular intervals through the course. In the early 20th century, radio became a useful tool for education, and then eventually the telephone, which presented live interaction, became between teachers and students. By the mid-century, the television had become more common to use for broadcast and also through VHS tapes, CD-ROM. When computers became more common, the internet was not common at the time. By the late 20th century, more colleges and universities were offering some online courses. By the 21st century, the general public had become more comfortable with online distance learning. Definitions and scope of online distance learning. With the development of e-learning technologies and methodologies developed with them, online distance learning is often referred simply as distance learning and distance education and often used interchangeably. This web-based learning requires students to be self-directed and self-regulated since face-to-face interaction is limited, not being in a physical classroom. It is also sometimes called informal and blended because sometimes these things coexist in some manner. I'm choosing to use the term online distance learning to encompass a range of teaching methodologies and technologies that by definition occur at some distance between teacher and learner via the internet. Some advantages and disadvantages. Advantages: it's developing technology and it changes our approaches to learning. It provides an opportunity for self-regulated learning, which allows students to work how they want to at their own pace with whatever technology they have available to them. Students can also review and repeat material as needed. I think that's a big plus. Actually, in 2007, I started my YouTube channel. And the only reason why I started it is I wanted to create a way for my students to go home and be able to rehearse stuff at home without, I used to tell them, hey, use this site because you can't bring me home with you. You can try to call me or email me, but that's not really the thing. But if we can record some stuff and put it on YouTube, you can refer to that later. I had no idea within a few weeks. I got an email from some school in China. They were like, oh, thank you for putting all this stuff up online. And I'm like, what? And they're like, we've been using it in our classroom. This is in 2007. I was like, it had never occurred to me that it would reach something like that. So that's how I got started doing it, is just to give students an opportunity to do stuff at home. Even though we already did it here, they could do it at home, and they can repeat it as many times as they need to. I like that a lot. It's less work for me too. I don't have to repeat it. I expect them basically next time you come to class, make sure you have it down. You have every opportunity to do it at home. It has the opportunity for the use of new technologies such as social media, which is big now, of course, video platforms, discussion forums, and more. It also provides access for students who have proximity challenges. It provides fun and exciting ways for teachers and students to engage with each other. Some disadvantages: teachers and students can feel isolated because we're not together. Not all teachers and students have access to the same technology, which I found to be very problematic, especially when you're dealing with different socioeconomic statuses. Not everybody has access to the same stuff or the same quality of internet. So that also means connections with streaming can be very poor at times, or just not really compatible. And then, of course, things like your power going out or the internet simply going down can be problematic as well. Constructivist learning theory. The learning experience, instructional design, and pedagogy need to be adapted to a web-based environment in online distance learning. A CLT approach is helpful because it allows teachers to present ideas and experiences where students can derive their own meaning for deeper learning. Behavioralism has a challenge here in that it is based in conditioning the how we act to form conclusions on how we think, which is difficult to reproduce in online distance learning. Furthermore, every student brings to their learning a past experience in life and how they understand those experiences. In my personal teaching, I found this to be extremely useful. I I think when I was younger, I used to just kind of assume every kid or whatever I was teaching was like the same, and then I found out really quickly they're not. They don't have the same parents, they don't come from the same places, they don't have the same language, especially here in Gainesville, the same culture, and some of them are international families, like all over the place. So before I even knew about this theory, I started doing this sort of thing where I was like, okay, let me present them with some ideas and see what they think of it. And then let's see if we can work with those ideas, and then see if I can bring them back to some sort of cohesion with the way things are usually done, so that they can play like a drum line or an ensemble at their school, that kind of thing. So that's why I started approaching it. And then when I came across this theory in one of the books we were reading, I was like, that's it. That's it. This works for me. Versus expecting everybody to be a cookie cutter kind of thing where you have to do the same thing, think the same way, all this kind of stuff. That doesn't tend to work, especially in our culture where we have so many different types of people. Percussion pedagogy. Percussion is any musical instrument that is hit, shaken, or scraped either with a stick, mallet, hand, or other implement. You brought up in my paper several times, what does that mean, scraped? Scraping something, with something else? I mean, I don't know how to define that any further. Maybe Dr. Broadway can help me with that later. But that's what that means. Or rubbing, sometimes we use the word rubbing.
Slang means scratching.
I don't know if scraping was the thing that I was asking about at that point.
Okay.
I know what scraping means. I think it may have been the way that you phrased it. Or
It may have been a language thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, I just remember you brought it up once, and so I changed the wording, and then you brought it up again, and I changed the wording. I didn't know if I satisfied you or not, but I didn't know another way to talk about it. Okay, main instrument categories. Snare drum, keyboard percussion, timpani, auxiliary percussion, drum set, world percussion. Let me explain why I chose it this way. Usually what happens in our culture in Western society is we learn the snare drum first. That's usually what happens. But the reason why I say snare drum instead of drum is usually it is on a snare drum. But that could also be a practice pad, or it could be whatever other drum you happen to have. But all that stuff transfers over to the other drums. So we usually just start on the snare drum, which sometimes we think of as like the lead drum. Keyboard percussion encompasses, well, I'll get into all that in a second. So that's the thing with the snare drum. So the snare drum has wires or guts fixed normally to the bottom of the head. It is considered to be a non-pitched instrument. Its education is primarily concerned with rudiments, which are music vocabulary words for percussionists in the study of rhythms and tempos. Keyboard percussion. Instruments that are set up like a piano keyboard and played with mallets. So I'm only listing a few here, but there's more than this, but these are the more common ones. You have the marimba, which is made out of a thicker wood, but it has more of a mellow tone. It's usually about 3.5 or 5 octave range. Xylophone is a denser wood, higher in pitch, usually about 3.5 octaves. The vibraphone is a metallophone, so it's a metal instrument that is set up usually about 3.5 octaves. The glockenspiel, or bells, is a smaller, higher pitched instrument. Usually they're 2.5 octaves, but I've seen some 3 ones. And then chimes are big, long tubular bells, another metallophone, usually about 1.5 octaves, sometimes 2. These are the primary instruments in this category, though others do exist. And they also have bass versions and soprano versions, so it's not just like what you see in the magazine or what you see just down the hall at the concert. We do have other versions of this. Timpani, bowl-shaped drums that are tuned to specific pitches. It is completely normal to see them set up as 2, 3, or 4 drums, though really any number is possible. I just saw something yesterday, somebody had 9 timpani, some performance I saw. I don't know how you play that. You have to like stack them in rows or something, right? Modern drums are tuned to specific pitches using a spring-loaded pedal system that can adjust the tension of the drum head, therefore adjusting the pitch of the drum. One of the challenges with timpani is players are expected to know elements of snare drum and keyboard percussion in a singular instrument. Auxiliary percussion, all the other instruments. Now I list a few things here like tambourine, cowbells, blocks, shakers, other less commonly used instruments, but what I didn't put on here is things like bird calls and sound effects and like weird stuff that doesn't really fall into any other instrument category usually just gets thrown in the percussion section. It's usually what happens. So we also consider that auxiliary percussion even though it may not technically be a percussion instrument. Various other drums, cymbals, and gongs would also fit into this category. They are They are articulated using various methods of striking, scraping, shaking, the things that I mentioned earlier. Simulate soldiers marching or even the kitchen. I've personally seen used in performances. So there's like the marching thing is there's something called a marching machine where it's basically a wooden frame with all these strings going through it and then all these like cylindrical like pieces of wood. You just do this on a table and it sounds like a group marching. So that's a weird thing. And then I meant to say the kitchen sink. That's a mistake on my part. I've literally seen that too. And actually, I wanted to make a comment in here, but I didn't really have enough room to do it. There's a friend of mine that in one of his vans, he actually used it in a recording, pretty famous guy. He actually took a plane propeller and put it up on a cymbal stand and made that a part of something, and then on one side of his drum, and on the other side he had a beer keg, I think. And it actually showed up in the recording. It actually sounds really, really cool. So like anything, really. Oh, actually, I did write that in here. How about that? So everything can be used as a percussion instrument. Okay, drum set. A collection of several percussion instruments played together, also called a trap kit for contraption, typically made up of snare drum, bass drum, tom-toms, hi-hat, ride cymbal, crash cymbals. Other instruments such as cowbell are also common. It is an attempt to essentially create an entire percussion section within a percussionist. The instruments derive themselves from all over the world, which makes sense that it's an American instrument since people in American history come from everywhere around the world. All instruments of music are taught to be, all styles of music are taught in the drum set percussionists. The drum set also incorporates pedals to play instruments with the feet, such as bass drum or hi-hat. They are also used to play with auxiliary instruments such as cowbell, woodblock, and anything else the percussionist decides to incorporate. Road percussion. Percussion instruments that are not common in Western music from around the world. These are most often hand drums, bells, cymbals, and shakers. Bongos and congas are thicker skinned hand drums that originate in Latin America, so South America, Central America, the Caribbean islands. Djembes and ashikos came to the Americas through the Africans from West African countries such as Ghana and Senegal. Asian cultures have contributed much to do with metallophones, such as various pitched instruments like gamelan, and non-pitched instruments such as bells, cymbals, and gongs. There's a lot more to the story. The important thing to know is that each of these cultures from around the world have provided all sorts of unique instruments we get to enjoy in Western music. Each culture has its own techniques and rhythms and patterns that are unique to them. With the globalization of culture, these instruments are shared to form new styles of music. I wanted to back up to something. Okay, so the reason why I put this in this order is I tried to do it in order of like the way I remember learning percussion in the way that I see it most oftenly taught in Western society. So we usually start with the snare drum here, and that's a very European instrument. We brought that over here when we were boring. That was very, very normal. Keyboard percussion, pretty much every culture comes from that, and I probably need to dive more into the history of that, but we all need to know keyboard percussion, bells, glockenspiel, vibraphone, all this kind of stuff. Very much connected to the piano. And then we have timpani, which we bring all that from the European stuff. In fact, in some ways, that's more common than even snare drum or keyboard instruments in the orchestra. And then auxiliary percussion, because you learn those things along the way as you need it. So the whole list is huge, so you just learn little stuff as you need to. Probably like triangle and tambourine, bass drum, stuff like that, and then maybe weird other instruments later. And then I put drum set in there next because drum set is an American instrument. I have a French student. He's an adult now, but when I was teaching him, he was his dad was doing a sabbatical here and doing some research at the university, and so he was doing drum lessons, percussion lessons with me. So he knew how to play drum set and all this stuff, but the way he played drum set wasn't like the way we play drum set. We play drum sets with like drum beats like pop songs and stuff. That's not how they do it. They play it like it's a multi-percussion piece. Like, he had no idea how to play any drum beats, so that was an interesting thing for me, because I assumed if you played drum set, you knew how to play regular, like, rock beats and stuff. So I put that there, but not every percussionist is a drum set player. Not everybody's interested in drum set, so it's not, I think these days everybody should know how to play drum set, but that's not really always the case. And then, of course, world percussion comes at the very end, because not everybody's dealing with that. No, all these things are way more common than they were when I was in school. All right, percussion pedagogy order. Well, I kind of just explained all that. All right, cool. That works out that slide. All right, need for project. Online distance learning involves a great deal of self-directed learning. Constructivist learning theory can form the foundation of an effective teaching strategy that encourages students towards self-directed learning and critical thinking, through which they come to construct their own learning through experiences facilitated by the instructor. There are many resources in online distance learning for percussion educators, students, and performers. However, they are mostly focused on one or very few instruments, which requires users to refer to many resources, which is not very efficient. It can be helpful to have a single website that is convenient to use rather than having a multiple resources to meet the multiple needs percussion students may have. Existing websites are mostly static, not interactive. This website has an opportunity to connect users in various ways to interact with each other. Over time, this project can grow and develop on foundations developed in the ODL, CLT, and PPP. So what I want to do now is show you guys the website that I created. It's not complete, it's a work in progress, but it's a good start, and I have some good news about that too. So let me get there. Yeah, we'll go here. Okay, so I'd be kind of like, why is that like that? That's a formatting thing. I'll go back and fix it. That's gonna annoy me. I'm gonna fix it now.
Let's just go ahead and
Yeah,
do it.
okay. All right. So up here at the top, you have a counter. You see that it says 404? Yeah, right there. I literally made this live on Monday. That's how many people have been here since Monday. I'm not advertising it yet. There's an opportunity for people to donate to us if they want to. There's a way to search for anything on the website through here. You can connect through our fan page or our Instagram here. The Join the Group is a Facebook group. So this is where I'm going to lead everybody to go to. Instead of us hosting a separate group on this website, it's going to be there on in social media there. They're connected to it anyway. And then this is basically a forum where they can write something to us and give us some feedback. And some people have been filling that out for us. All right, how do I go back on this? When that goes away, how do you go back? I'll just do this one. Oh, it doesn't have the header there. That's what it is. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. Okay, so then down here I have a visual representation of all the categories that we talked about earlier, but I also have it up here. So snare drum, keyboard percussion, symphony, auxiliary percussion, drum set, roll percussion. I'll get to that big list in a little bit. Here you have a typical about and contact thing, so this has a little bit about me and some of the stuff that I've done. And then you have a contact thing here, so people can contact us that way. So each section is going to be set up this way. I might change some of this stuff a lot, but basically what I wanted to do is have an intro thing where every instrument has, okay, this is what the drum is, here's how you hold the sticks, these really basic things. Okay, here are the exercises that you could use to improve on these skill sets and develop technique. Okay, here's some of the vocabulary. For snare drum, you got all these rudiments, and this is not the exhaustive list. I might have to arrange this differently, it's kind of big. And then I want to have a section that deals with repertoire, which obviously I don't have that ready yet. But that's going to be typical stuff that we would study, Dr. Robbie, like we do, like we would put that there. And this would be in the form of sheet music, videos, other types of media, things like that, recordings, whatever. So keyboard percussion set up the same way. So I have different intro videos for all the instruments that I mentioned, and also some other things. Also learning some basic music theory stuff, like whole steps and half steps and some scales and whatnot. Exercises, whole list of scales here, this would be exhaustive, and repertoire as well. Timpani, have an introduction on, okay, what is timpani? How do you play the timpani? What's the technique? How do you tune them? How do you muffle? Like those kind of things. So this isn't fully developed yet, but it's in progress. And then here, kind of the same situation, introduction of all these auxiliary percussion instruments, exercises you can use, rhythms that are common to particular types of auxiliary percussion, and repertoire. I haven't gotten very far with this, but under the introduction section, it'd be like, okay, here are the instruments on the drum set, here's what they do, here's where they come from, here's how you play them, here's how you tune them, here's how you know which tom-tom from a bass drum, that kind of stuff. Exercises that you would do on that, and then for beats, this would be like styles, like samba, or rock, or jazz, like all that kind of stuff would be put into this thing. And then repertoire would be however I decide I want to do that. I'm still kind of thinking about how I want to do that one. And then roll percussion. This would be like an introduction to, like, you see tabla there, frame drum, djembe, like all that stuff would be there. Down here we have taiko drums, so all that kind of stuff would be here. And this would be a pretty long list. And then whatever exercises seem relevant to it. Some of them you play with mouths or sticks. Some of them you have to use your hand in different ways, so it would have those kind of techniques in there. Some of them involve like kind of scraping type things, like the guru. So that kind of stuff would be there. Common rhythms, repertoire. And then, what I haven't started this yet, this is going to be a fun one, what I call the big list. The big list is going to be a list of every instrument I can think of that goes in here. And I'm going to draw a lot of that from these books here. And then once I get beyond those books, as I discover new instruments, I'll put them in here. And the way I'm gonna have this organized, it's gonna say the name of the instrument, some image of the instrument, an article about the instrument, and where you can buy it, or who you can buy it from, so that there's a resource. One of the comments I got from one of the people that filled out the thing this week is, they were like, oh, I really like the flow of this. I understand you're still building it. These are the kind of things I'd like to see, because this is some band director in Texas. I would like to see these sort of things, and I know I'd send my students to come use this if I know it's all in one place, but something else we need as band directors too is we're not really sure what to buy. So if you can help us get pointed in the right direction, like what mallets should we buy? What drums should we buy? What's good? What's not good? What are we looking for? So I can make recommendations based on those things. That would go there. And then down here is normal stuff. I do have my capstone paper here if people want to watch it. I do have the slideshow here. I'm aware I have some typos I need to fix. They can look at that there if they want to. I'm also filming myself here, and I'm going to edit it later so I can get a condensed version of this and put some version of it on the website so people can see that this came out of a university project. This wasn't just something I made up. I mean, I've been thinking about it for years, but I wanted to use my graduate degree at the University of Florida to build something that I was actually using. So you can see I actually have signs. We're actually using it. We actually have a website. We're actually using it. People are talking to me. We're actually doing this. Like, it's actually happening, like right now. So I'm really super excited about this opportunity to work on this project, make it better with you guys, and see where it grows from here. And this is really my passion. This is why I came to the University of Florida again, is this is what I wanted to do. This was my goal. And all the other classes I took were amazing. I wanted to comment on something, Dr. Hanning. The very first class I had with you was the music education philosophy class. And I know that we didn't always agree on stuff, but it really did make me think about stuff. The thing that we're talking about is like, what is music education philosophy? So I actually went back and looked at some of the Elliott stuff and all this kind of stuff because I was thinking about including it in my presentation, but I didn't want to be like too long about it. But I wanted to make a comment on this. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, your position was more utilitarian or praxial?
I tend to take a utilitarian perspective.
Okay, I think that's what I remember. And I was more aesthetics, I think is what the other one is. And the reason why it's not that either one's right or not. I see the purpose in the utilitarian stuff because music does serve a purpose. But my thought process is, well, it serves a purpose because it feels like something to you. Mm-hmm. So like, I feel like you have to have the feeling first before you want to do something with it. But that's just my feeling. But that's just a philosophy thing. But does it really matter? But thinking about it matters. Yeah. People ask me a lot, Tobin, what's good music? Or they'll say, this is terrible music, this and this and this. And they're like, Tobin, what's good music? And it's like, well, that's not really a fair question because I like a lot of music. My feeling is if it makes your body have a response or a reaction, or your emotions have a response or reaction, that's probably good music for you. I may not like it, may not move me the same way. If it works for you, that's good for you. My music education philosophy is, I've done the whole strict classical approach. I've done the whole like, let's go play in a drum circle and just jam out, not have any structure. I've done all this stuff. And basically the way I look at it now is if we're having fun and learning something, I think we're doing good work. And that's what I care about. So, but your class taught me to think about that stuff because before your class, I didn't think about these sort of things. I just kind of knew what I liked, but didn't really think about that kind of stuff. And then Dr. Brado, I only commented on something that you provided me with an opportunity for. When I did my independent study with you, with the bibliography, annotated bibliography, at first I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be easy. You write down a bunch of books, do a little summary about it. But you forced me to like really think more critically about it, and then also look at everything that I know and see if there's any gaps in my what would you call it? Well, gaps in there. So I started filling out the gaps, and then when I started working with Clyde later, that was something he actually kind of harped on me with as well. But he focused more on the drum set stuff because he saw a lot of deficiencies there. But that led to something that I thought was kind of interesting in my experience. That turned into, I started discovering we didn't have a lot of this stuff in our library. That's what it turned into. So I got in touch, I can't remember the director's name, but I got in touch with the director at the UF Libraries and said, hey, we want books, and you kind of helped me out a lot with this. And they're like, hey, just give us a list. We'll order where we're going to order. And whatever we can't get now, we'll get it next time we get it in the budget. Like, I don't know how far they got with that, but they were very excited that somebody came in and made recommendations, because I guess that hadn't been done in a while or something like that. But those are two experiences I wanted to share with you guys that made a big impact on me. Of course, there was a lot of other things. Like Cuba was awesome, definitely awesome, changed my life. But as it relates just to the University of Florida, the library thing, I think it's huge because that's knowledge that carries on to the future. And then the philosophy stuff gets me to think about things I can pass on to my students. It gets them to think about things in the future. And this website, it's all about doing stuff in the future. And you guys have been a very big part of that in my life, and I really appreciate that. So that concludes my presentation.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.
So Tobin and I have gone back and forth a lot about different things, so I'd let you start with some questions, comments, either about the paper, about the website, about the presentation, just whatever you want to dig into.
I really, and you've already hit the one thing I was gonna mention, just watch the typos, so just circle on a couple of things, wordsmithing, just make sure you go back to the fine tooth comb, I'm sure he's gonna catch every single thing in there. Because remember, its apostrophe is, but it's possessive, it has no apostrophe, so please don't make that mistake, so just go back and check that.
Are we referring mostly to the slideshow?
Slideshow, and just a few things, I think you already fixed the ones.
Yeah, the paper itself should be pretty straight.
Yeah.
Actually, even after the fact, I looked over it like yesterday or something and found a few more things.
Yeah. So, have people read a lot. But one thing that interests me is you talk about the interactive nature. Because the interactive thing is challenging, as we all know when we went online with Zoom and all these different platforms, is there's not a very good real-time way to perform with another person. There are some things that are close, you know, metronome and some of these things that are out there. But if you're trying to play a duet with a student, or you're trying to work in real time, it's a challenge. You mentioned the interactive nature of your website. Now, that's one question I have for you is how are you going to make it interactive other than people watching and consuming the materials there? How do you intend to interact with the student?
Well, I'm starting out with social media because that's easy. People can connect through social media, and we have a group. There's like 400 and something people in that group. They're already talking to each other. And teachers and students and performers, they're already talking to each other because of this website. Because they're clicking this button and joining the group. There's some 400 and something. I'm not talking about the number that you're seeing there. They actually are clicking on the button and joining the group. So they're talking to each other there. That's one way.
Okay.
And also connecting through Instagram. I don't want to get into the TikTok thing, but in Instagram, you have an opportunity there in Instagram where they have something called remixes. There's probably another term for it. But basically, you can perform something, and then somebody can perform with that, and then both it's published, like a duet. I think that's what they call that. That's pretty interactive. But you know, people I'm not familiar with all the programs that are coming out now, but there's some programs that are really working on the latency thing. I haven't used them personally, so I can't speak for it, but I've heard some of it's getting really good.
Getting better, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, because I wasn't sure if that was a future approach, is actually have instruction besides community.
Well, of course, you have like FaceTime or Zoom or whatever. You do those sort of things too. If I discover other virtual ways to do things, I'll incorporate that.
All right. And then just the other question, are we talking more about the Capstone or the website, or is it both the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been focusing a little bit more on the paper because this is obviously still, what I've been looking at this is, you've done the research, you've done the background, you've done the foundation, which is all in your paper, to create this, and so we have the template, the outline for this, but I'm not as interested in where this goes necessarily. That's your baby, and I think it's great, and I hope you continue to go with it, but for the purposes of the Capstone, I'm a little less interested in that than I am on the ideas and the foundation that went into it, but that doesn't mean we can't
No, it's okay.
comment on it.
Well, why don't we go back, why don't you if you have some questions?
No,
But
go for it.
I did not bring my laptop with me, so I was on a motorcycle, so I was at home. So some of my notes, unfortunately, are there, and I think most of the things I sent to you directly, Tobin, so I think you've answered most of those questions. But let me ask you kind of call it a philosophical question. You mentioned how the pandemic came along and made this not just a thought, but an actual relevance in your life. If you could, how has the pandemic potentially changed some of your thinking, maybe even what's on the page here, or has it? In other words,
I thought about creating a whole section that addressed the pandemic, but because I started this in 2016, I wanted to complete what I started and not address that animal. That is an animal of a subject. And I do have a lot of teacher friends from various fields, and we talk a lot about this stuff, and we're still talking about it. Because it happened once, so it's likely going to happen again, and God forbid there's like a war or something that goes on, and we get to a place where we can't meet in person, so how are we going to deal with that? So the pandemic forced us to create or get used to technologies that already existed to be able to do the things that we do now in person. We're lucky we get to meet now in person. I know a couple of years ago we couldn't do that, but we're able to do that now. And because we're able to do that now, we have the know-how to do that. I mean, that's the answer, I guess, yeah.
Because I always wonder about projects like this that, everything we do is immediately outdated
Right.
the day it's turned in.
Oh yeah, like even though this website stuff, I'm already working on Web 4 stuff that I want to incorporate into this. And the more that I learn about this, like the AI stuff coming out now, like I'm already thinking about incorporating all that into here in some creative ways. But as I'm thinking about that, Web 5 stuff started coming out. I study a lot of this stuff. Actually, it's part of the reason why I gave you guys these pins. You look at it. It's from the Miami NFT conference I went to last year. So they talk about NFTs, cryptocurrencies, Web 4, Web 5 kind of stuff, and they're really trying to get people connected in various industries to what's going on in the tech world. It blew my mind. I got to listen to some amazing speakers and participate in some amazing activities, and I was like, wow, my world is small. It was really, really nice.
And the only other question, this is where it's always, debate about this. Some of the traditional titles for instrument classes you don't use in this paper, like membranophone, idiophone, aerophone, and things like that. And again, you're using more of a teacher speak on there. I don't know if that was something that is a factor or shouldn't be a factor in something like this, more of that connection. Because you mentioned auxiliary, but of course some auxiliaries are aerophones, and some are idiophones, and some are membranophones.
Well, think about how long it took you to formulate that question. That's why I didn't include it in the paper. I just wanted to focus on categories and the way that I was going to teach.
Gotcha.
Those other things can happen later.
Okay, so that may be something for the future, is you may have to find a way to, it's kind of, remember when we first learned to read and had the rhythm tree, and it kind of builds down to 30
Right,
notes?
some sort of diagram or something. Yeah.
So something that kind of
Instrument families within
traces-
percussion.
Yeah, so that way they understand that timpani and snare drum are, you mentioned that they're related in their technique, but they're actually related in their basic family as far as the membranophone. So just a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this gets into one of the things that I wanted to comment on, or at least get you to think about a little bit. And you and I have had kind of this conversation at a number of points throughout the project, right? So if you're going to claim that this project is comprehensive, if you're going to say that we're covering everything, then you can't do what you just did and say, well, but I decided not to do those because that was too much. Either it's comprehensive or it's not, right? And so my first question for you is, do you want to make this a little bit more focused so that you can be more you can provide more information and more of a pathway within the stuff that you've provided? Or do you want this to be as comprehensive as you can possibly make it and just have everything in the kitchen sink, as you said, involved in what's going on?
So what I meant by, well, I didn't want to include that, I meant as far as the paper goes, because that would make that really, really long. And that would be okay, except it's already long enough, and it's taken me this long to get to this point. I wanted to keep the paper very focused.
Sure.
And I'm using the paper as a foundation for how I think about all this other stuff. The website is a living document. It's just live, it'll just grow. And over time, I won't be the only contributor, there'll be other contributors. And so it'll just grow with that. And so I'm into that idea where I want it to be as inclusive, all-inclusive as possible, but I'm just one person. I can only do as much as I can do. And I do have a lot of friends that do other things that want to contribute, so I'm going to pull on them as well. So the idea is like, we'll never have everything perfect or everything in there that exists in the world, but we're going to make an attempt to make it as complete as possible.
So then I think for the purposes of the paper, at least, one thing that you may want to do is go back and look and see where you can be clear about why you've made those decisions and what's not included for the purposes of this document specifically, and how you're delimiting what you're talking about in this document specifically, so that it's a little bit clearer to the reader. These are the pieces that that I've chosen to focus on for this particular thing. The other question that I have for you is I'm still not entirely sure let me formulate this question the way that I want to. So if I go to the website, right, and if I'm looking at the snare drum materials, if I'm a beginner and I'm at home, right, and I'm just trying to figure this out, am I supposed to go through all of these materials in order? Or is there a particular way, you know, that I should, and how long should I spend on each one, and like, what do I do? So if I'm a brand new beginner, I found your website, I just learning at home, I don't have a teacher, this is my teacher because this is the resource that I have. Like you said, I live in rural wherever. What do I do?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I thought about that, I just didn't bring it up.
Yeah.
So that's a curriculum thing, and so the way I look at it is I'm still kind of wrapping my head how I want to incorporate this. I might actually have maybe in each section like a syllabus, you know, something like that. Like, here's how you should do things in this particular order. But something that I did with Dr. Sheridan that's really, really cool is when I took her instructional design class, I created this whole thing in this whole big document I did with her. I could just literally draw on that. It's all there. I did that like 3 years ago or 4 years ago, whatever it was. But that as a starting point, and use that sort of design and incorporate that into this.
So my question is, if your stated purpose for this, the whole foundation and why you talked about why you wanted to do this, is to provide that kind of a resource for people who maybe don't have access.
They need to know how to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is it not included from the very beginning? Like you say, I can do that. Why have you not done that?
Because I built this on Monday.
This?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay, let me back up a little bit. I started some of the framework a few weeks ago, but like I got sick, and I was really just trying to get some bare bones up here, but I had a little bit more time, so I started messing with it, like, you know, adding some other things to it. But I published this on Monday. So everything that you see here, like all these things, all the videos were recorded years ago, so I'm just borrowing from stuff that I've already done.
Sure.
I'm definitely going to include the things that you're suggesting here, like curriculum, instructional design kind of stuff. It's just not there yet.
So that answers my question as to why this is still, that sort of describes why this is still in progress, although I'm a little taken aback that something that we've been working on for so long, you know, and that you're presenting just literally just got built. But it doesn't answer my original question, which is, if that was your purpose, why is it not built that way from the beginning? I get why it's not done. What I don't get is why the structure of this is not what you said you wanted to accomplish.
Let me clarify something. I didn't say I just started this on Monday. I mean, I over the weekend, I kind of buttoned some things up so I could publish it to make it easier for the presentation. My original plan was to go into the editor and just show you, like, okay, this is what I'm thinking about doing, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I've been working on this for a while. I'm just saying what you're seeing now got published on Monday.
Sure.
Yeah, but you're right. I've been thinking about this along the way. I just have not decided exactly how I want to do that. I thought about creating a whole different category that had a list of all the syllabuses and whatever, but I thought that might be confusing to people, so I was thinking about maybe just doing it per category. It might be a little bit easier to grasp for people. I'm still putting some thought into that. My biggest thing is I've been designing websites for some 30 years now, and over my time with multiple businesses and stuff like that, I've noticed that you could put fancy cool things into websites, and that's fine, it's fun, but if it's not user-friendly, then nobody's going to use it. And I want this website to be that way too. That's why I don't have any fancy GIFs and videos and stuff popping up all over the place. I want it to be very clear and concise. That's what I'm looking for.
And that's fine. But we want to make sure that the user-friendliness includes getting at the thing that you want to get at. So this is what you and I have been going back and forth a lot about in terms of this progression pedagogy section. So you have a lot of really great information about distance learning. You have a lot of really great information about constructivist learning theory. What it's not clear to me entirely is how those things are being applied to the way that you teach percussion in this format, right? How does that reflected in the way that you've chosen to build this website? Because to me, what this looks like is just a repository of resources right now.
Right.
And that's useful, but doesn't really connect with a lot of the content that you've been put in previously. And so this is why I wanted to see, when you and I talked about the percussion pedagogy section of the paper for a long time, because what I wanted to see was, okay, so here's a bunch of principles of how to teach. Now here's what we teach, right? And now here's how I'm going to take what we teach and teach it in this way so that we get that connection.
I think that's what I was getting at, was asking about the website.
Yeah.
Because I see that it's like the final piece of this isn't quite done yet. That I'm not seeing the final, you know, I know your heart as an educator. I don't see that on the website right now. I see, you said it's a repository of information, which is great, but I don't see like the previous things you did on YouTube, I saw a progression of how you're going to use that as a teacher. Here, I'm not seeing that yet. And as you said, it may not be there yet, but I was kind of expecting that a little bit more when I saw the website.
Okay, thank you for the feedback.
So one thing that I think is going to be important as you go forward for you, maybe not for the purposes of the Capstone project, but as you go forward for you, is that you continue to think about, and this is what I kept trying to poke at you about, and we got there partway, but I think you can still go further, is you got all these books, you got all this stuff. How do you put all this together, right? What is the history? So you gave us the history of constructivist learning theory, and this guy had this idea, this guy had this idea, and over time we've developed, here's what, the core of what we have. What is that for this percussion pedagogy stuff? And you're starting to get there. So we've gotten pieces now, like normally we start on snare drum, and then we move on to keyboard instruments, and we see that structure. And so what I would love to see is then when I click on the website, there's something here maybe that says, and you don't have to do exactly this, I'm not saying exactly this, but if I click on the website and it says, you're a beginner, probably you should go get a snare drum. Normally we start with snare drum. So if you don't know what else to do, go get a snare drum, and here's a bunch of snare drum exercises that you can go through in this order. You see what I'm saying? So that I
No, I
get
love that. I love that.
And that's where we combine this percussion pedagogy piece, which says, normally we start on snare drum, then we do this, then we do this. First we learn grip, and then we learn rudiments, and then we learn whatever that sequence is, which is still, like I said, there are pieces of that in your paper, but I think you can still go further with it. And then how is that going to be reflected in what you're creating? So that's, I think that's going to be the main thing for you to think about going forward, so that this becomes an educational resource rather than just.
I love that. Yeah, the way this is set up right now is more kind of like an encyclopedia kind of thing. And that's what I wanted to start with, because I was trying to, exactly what you were talking about.
I'm going to interrupt you, and I hate to interrupt you, but I'm still confused. Why is that what you wanted to start with? That's completely not what you talk about wanting to do.
I was just trying to build something to show something.
That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, I haven't gotten very far.
Yeah, and so that, but even from the beginning, what you've done here is you put together something you could put together quickly. You didn't put together something that reflects what's actually in, what you say you want to do. And I want to caution you about that, because I see that in some of the other things that you've done throughout this process, in that you have a really good idea, but then when it comes to the implementation, sometimes you realize that your idea is going to be really complicated to do, and so you default back to something else, which still might be good. Like, this is still a good resource. I don't mean to say it's not a good resource, but it's not what you said you wanted to create. Does that make sense? So you want to make sure that the things that you're doing really reflect the purpose that you put forward, and I think that's going to be really important.
And it might be going forward, and this is a suggestion you don't have to follow, instead of trying to build a little bit of everything, maybe the best thing to do is start, as Dr. Haynes said, okay, you're starting on snare drum. Build your website in the order you want the student to progress, and that way the student can be progressing with you. Because right now, yes, if I'm a marimba player, I can go to a certain place, or if I'm a snare drummer, I can go to a certain place, but if I'm a beginner, like maybe one of your landing things on that opening page should be how to use this website.
Yeah.
Or what to do next, what's next, what's my first step, or something like that, whatever you want to call it. I completely agree with you. I get frustrated with websites where it takes me 10 clicks to find the information I want. I want to be able to click something and it says, what do I do next? And I want to be able to progress through that step by step by step. And that's the big complaint I always have with the university websites. It's not that way. We can't do that. And I always argue with our web designers about it. I'm not a web designer, but I can encourage you, if you are a web designer, to make it so the student knows exactly where they go. Because once they click, you probably know the stat better than me. Once they click 5 times, they give up, supposedly. There's some stat like that.
It probably is like, maybe it could be 3. Like after 3, I'm done. Like if I can't find it in 3, I'm done.
And so what I would say is, just continue to think about that and continue to think about what you could do. Now, there is an argument to be made, and I will give you this before you or somebody else brings this to me. There is an argument to be made that when you think about constructivist learning theory, one of the things that's in constructivist learning theory is that students should be able to sort of design their own learning experiences. They should be able to decide kind of what they want to do at any given point. And you can do that. You can provide them with some choice, and you can provide them with some agency and ownership in what they're doing. But one of the things we know educators is that, especially with ranked beginners, you can't just throw them in the deep end and expect they're gonna be successful. You have to provide some sort of scaffolding. And so I want you to think about, what is the scaffolding that has been traditional? Where, in all of these resources that you've looked at, where do most people say that you should go? And this is when, if I go all the way back to when you and I were talking about the structure of that section, because originally you had it, let me summarize this book, and then let me summarize this book, and then let me summarize this. You were doing kind of resource by resource. And what I kept trying to get across is, if you look at all of these resources, what do they say should go first? Like 8 of the 10 say that the first thing you should do is snare drum. I'm making stuff up, but like that's, so if you look at all of percussion pedagogy, on average, we should start with the snare drum. And then on average, we should practice rudiments for 6 weeks before we move on to whatever. So think about what's the collected knowledge, and how can you structure that knowledge in a way that allows it to be conveyed to students. Especially since, as Dr. Broadway said before, you're not gonna be there, so you don't have as much interaction. Yeah, the Facebook group will help, but you don't have that sort of step-by-step interaction, so you have to scaffold that in through the materials. That teacher, this sort of the hand of the teacher, the guiding hand, has to be scaffolded in the materials rather than being able to be provided as you go. Anyhow, I know, shut up, I've talked about this for long enough.
I love it though, thank you so much for the feedback. That's why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Well, I think basically you said it much more eloquently. That's where I was kind of getting in the initial
Yeah.
discussion, is how the website connects to the project.
Right.
So you've basically taken anything I could say, and you've said it. So I'm more concerned, I guess I'm a utilitarian as well.
Yeah.
Because I'm more concerned about how you're gonna use it in the future. So, again, I don't know where it needs to be as far as the completion for this. I just wanna make sure you're in the right direction.
Yeah.
That once you get done with this, it's not just a repository.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that.
Any other questions or anything else for Tobin that you have before we chat a little bit here?
No, I think that's it.
All right, so Tobin, I'm just gonna ask you to step out in the hall. Don't go far.
Yeah, I'm
we'll
just
be out
gonna
there
get
for
some water
very
and
long.
hang out.
Yep. And we'll be out, get you in just a second. All right. So, as I said, I'm more interested in the document than I am in the website. I think he's got some good ideas for this product, but this is gonna be something he's gonna do over time. What I would like to see is in the document at the end.
Yeah, I think we're both going to the same place.
Yeah.
I'm looking at where it starts on percussion pedagogy,
Yep.
which is by far the shortest section of the document.
Yeah, and even that part, I think, I've pushed him maybe as far as I can push him, I think, on that percussion pedagogy section.
Where's that need for the
Starts on
project?
21.
21, yeah.
So this has come a fair ways, and I think there is a reasonable amount of content here. I mean, I'll defer to you whether
Oh,
there
no,
are
I'm
specific
sorry, that's not the
things.
section I was thinking of, I'm sorry.
The
That's-
website section at the end?
It's the percussion education pedagogy. Yeah, the connection with the percussion education. That's
Yeah.
all fine.
Yeah, so I think it's this website section.
Yeah, I think, sorry, it's the last section.
Yeah, and
Whatever.
so what I want to encourage him to do is to expand that a little bit. And I'm going to tell him it doesn't need to be done, it doesn't need to be built out on the
Yes.
website. But I want to see him talk a little bit more in this section about how he's going to apply some of the previous, the constructivist learning theory things, and how he's going to address some of those things.
Yeah, because, again, I'll leave it to you to decide, but he talks about studypercussion.org, and he says, this resource includes,
Right.
like it is already done, static lessons and classes through videos, recordings, and writings. This is how most sites function. So,
Yeah.
and that's just my thing, even if it says this resource will include.
Right.
Or, this resource, I plan on doing this. This will be a valuable resource rather than this is a
Right.
valuable resource. That's the main complaint I have about it, is the resource he talks about doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yep.
And again, if you were just to set all those things, that's okay, that we're trying to, that the goal is to create a community, okay, good, that's great. Yeah, just those words, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, really what I'm basing a lot of this on is the first part of the paper. He's shown that he can get into the literature, he can read through and combine the ideas, he can apply those a little bit at least, and I'd like that a little bit more application. That's sort of what we're looking for out of the Capstone project. Like, have they taken away these skills and the ability to do something with it, whether or not he's able to actually build out the website.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
It's like I always tell my students that, if you say you're gonna do it, then do it.
Yeah.
Just don't say you're gonna do it.
Yeah.
So, and that's the first part of the paper, first half of the paper.
Yeah.
That's the best writing I've seen him do since he's been here.
He hired an editor. It got too good between drafts. He sent me one draft that was not very good, and then one draft that was really good, so he hired an editor, which is fine, you can do that, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, because it's tight, concise writing,
Yep.
and it, like you said, it's quoted well. So I have no complaints with
Okay.
what he's written.
So-
So if that's the primary focus of this, then I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and I think for me it is. We've never asked students to build something like this, you know what I mean? We ask them to write the paper and provide some sort of an application, but the application usually is hypothetical. You know what I mean? I will do this, or you could do this, or something, and I think he's got enough of that, especially if he expands it a little bit more.
Would have done that, I would have been happier.
Yeah. He started with this and wanted to back into the paper from it, and so we had to, he and I had to kind of figure something out.
Alright.
And you've worked with him, you know it's a little difficult to steer it
Yes.
sometimes.
Yes.
Okay, so what I'll tell him is, we're gonna pass him on to defense with edits pending, making sure that he's not saying things about the website that are already in place, that aren't in place, and expanding that last section a little bit to show more connection back to some of the ideas that he had earlier
Sure.
and talk about. Okay, cool. Let me bring it back in.
All right.
Yeah. All right, Toby, you come back in.
So you do this on purpose in this classroom, just to mess with you?
None of them work.
It's right twice a day?
Half of them, I swear, they usually replace the battery in 120 when it breaks, but. All right, so Tobin, I'm happy to tell you that Dr. Broadway and I are going to pass you on your defense.
Thank you.
With edits, as I mentioned earlier, is usually what happens. So we're focusing for the purposes of the capstone, we're focusing mostly on your paper, right? Because the products, these kinds of products are usually not something that we ask students to have completed for the purposes of the capstone project, right? So this is going to be, the website itself is going to be up to you. We've given you some feedback on what we think might be useful for you, but whether or not that really gets built out is up to you and when that happens, right? What we'd like to see you do with the paper, just to put some final touches on it. First of all, in the section where you talk about the website,
Page 33.
starting on page 33, what we'd like you to do is to talk about this for right now, for the purposes of the capstone paper, a little bit more in hypotheticals and a little bit more in future tense rather than in past tense, because it's not built out yet the way that you entirely plan to. And so you want to make sure that you're not saying, we have done this, but rather I will do this. And so in some places you've done that, but also there are a few places where you talk about, you know, what it already is. So you want to make sure that you're talking about that a little bit more in the future. And the other thing that I'd like to see you do is in this last section where you talk about the website, is to think a little bit about the conversation that we've had today, and think a little bit about all of the ideas that you have earlier in the paper in terms of constructivist learning theory and the benefits and drawbacks of online distance learning and those kinds of things. And try to explain a little bit more in that section how you plan for this website to address those ideas specifically. So I'd love to see you say something like, you know, we know that one of the challenges of online distance learning is feelings of isolation. Citation Smith 2022, whatever that's, you know, wherever that comes from. One way that this will be addressed in this website is to do such and such and such. Constructivist learning theory suggests that students should be allowed to choose their own. The way that, citation, the way that I'll do this in the website is to do so that we see the connection a little bit more between the ideas that you put forward, the percussion pedagogy, and what you're planning to do in the website itself, right? Because right now that last section is a little bit abbreviated, and I know it's because the website isn't completely built out yet, But if you write it a little bit more in the future tense, we'd like to see some more of how you think you're gonna apply. And again, this goes a little bit more along the lines of what we normally would see in a capstone, because again, normally we wouldn't be asking students to build out the resource, we'd just be asking them to say, okay, so you've done all this research, you have all these ideas, what would you do with it? What could you do with it? And so it's a little bit more hypothetical, but still we wanna see those connections. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Cool. So focusing mostly just on that last section, beefing up, I think, a little bit that last section of the paper. Other than that, we think the early parts of the paper especially, and the research that you've done and the background that you've provided in terms of constructivist learning theory and distance learning and everything is really good. I think it's really comprehensive and really provides a nice picture of where those things come from. And so like I said, we just want to see that application brought forward a little bit more. Now you have those ideas, show us how you're going to use them. But congratulations on a great project so
Thank you.
far, on a great defense. We really appreciate what you've done. I hope you do continue to build this out, because it seems like it's going to be a really cool resource. And yeah, nice work, man.
Yeah.
Very well done.
I have a couple things for you guys. Well, you mentioned the shirt thing. You lost a lot of weight.
Just try to put it back on, keep it on his
Yeah,
arms.
I gotta try and build it back out in a different
Yeah.
way.
So,
Thank you, sir.
there's a few different things in there, but the thing that I'm actually kind of most proud about right now is if you go to the bottom, there's a coffee cup for you. Check that out.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's cool.
So, I wasn't planning on starting a music school in St. Augustine, but as I've been getting to know people out there, and I'm playing with the orchestra and the band there, and getting to know all the other people that have been out there for a long time, they obviously started to figure out what I was doing here in Gainesville, and I was trying to be like anonymous, not tell people what I did in Gainesville, because I was looking for a new life, and they're like, Tobin, we really need this here, you gotta start this thing, and they're like pestering me for months over it, and I was like, fine, I'll do it. So it's been really easy to kind of pull it together because everybody's eager for it. And apparently they have never had a music school in St. Augustine before, which I was shocked to find out. So,
I'm not shocked, actually. I think that you're gonna find that you'll have probably greater growth there than in Gainesville. There's
well,
greater
already I've
growth
noticed
there.
that. Yeah, I've already noticed that. There's a lot of young families moving in. They're building like 3 new high schools, I think, in the next few years. It's growing like crazy. But I kind of, it's not just a gift for you guys, but like that's the fruit of what you guys have invested in me. That things are actually happening in the lives of other people. So that's something you can drink your coffee out of and be like, yeah, I know Tobin was a pain in the butt, but look what he's doing.
Well, and the thing to kind of finish up too is, the difference between criticism and critique is very close, but critique is trying to get better.
Right.
And there's not criticism going on today, there's critique.
What
But if we
when
want to see
people-
it grow, we want to see this be a useful thing for the future.
When I remember I had Rich Redmond here some years ago to do a clinic, and somewhere in there we were setting up. You weren't feeling particularly good that day, but I was like, I was thinking about coming back and doing my master's, but I'm not really sure. And you were like, oh, Tobin, you should consider that. We would love to have you. And so like a couple years later, that's when I decided to do that, and take advantage of that opportunity. But while I was doing that, some of the other people that I know, they're like, why? You don't need that. I'm like, I'm not doing this for a job. Like, I'm doing this because I want to be better. Like, those are the words that I said. I want to be better. My parents came back to me later and they're like, why are you getting your master's? You don't need that. You already work for yourself. I'm like, because I want to be better. And I'm having a very difficult time understanding why people don't understand me wanting to be better. But maybe people don't think that way. I pursued college and the work that I've done and graduate school because I want to be a better professional. Like, I'm not doing it because of a piece of paper. I really want to be better. This is my life's work. I really care about it.
Good.
And I think that's a great attitude. Yeah, keep learning.
Keep doing that.
Yep.
So I think that's the takeaway from this is don't stop where you are on this. Go ahead and finish
Yeah.
the edits as have been outlined, but then use this as you're talking about.
Do we have a due date on that? I mean, I'm gonna get it done as soon as
You and I
possible.
can chat.
All right,
I'll let you guys do that.
You'll see a shirt in there. The shirt is a lifestyle brand company that I started actually in 2011, which I think I'm gonna start back up again this year. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. And those drumsticks, I designed every part about those drumsticks,
Nice.
all of it, so you guys can have that too.
Thanks, sir.
You can
Appreciate
keep
it.
with
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
menace people with
Yeah.
mine. Yeah.
I'm
Lord
gonna
knows
be
I
happy
can't
to
do
do
this,
that.
but-
Can I get a picture with you guys before we go? Is that all right?
Sure,
Yeah.
you bet.
I don't know where we should go.
your books or something like
Yeah.
that.
Okay, that works.
There you go.
Okay, let's do this.
Just get the time right. Okay, good.
All right, guys. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
No worries.
All right, cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Hey,
You bet.
congratulations,
Thank
man, and
you.
we'll be in touch via email so we can work out some of these details. Dr. Broadway, you'll see a DocuSign document sometime
Gotcha.
next little bit.
Oh, yeah, I remember those things.
Yep.
So much better than, oh, you need something in blue or red?
Yeah, right. And then Tobin, like I said, one thing